The wind came off Halwyn Moor a full hour before the rain did. Aloan felt it against her left cheek and turned her face into it out of habit, the way her father had taught her to read weather before she was old enough to carry a pail. The gorse was bent low. The sheep had already gone down into the bottoms. That was the surer sign. Sheep knew a night before people did. She had 6 miles to walk and the light was going. In Kilmarth, the silversmith had given her 9 shillings for her mother's garnet cross. It was 4 shillings less than the cross was worth, and 3 more than she had expected, and she had thanked him for it. He had not looked at her while he counted the coins into her palm. Nobody in Kilmarth looked at her. The baker's wife had turned to the shelves. 2 women outside the church had found something of great interest in the wall. A boy of about 5 had stared at her openly until his mother took his shoulder and moved him along, and Aloan had thought, at least the child looked. She had stopped minding it. That was not true. She had stopped saying she minded it, and after 3 years the 2 things wore down to about the same weight. The 9 shillings were folded in a scrap of flannel in her left pocket, along with the apothecary's bill, which came to 11 6. In her right pocket was the other thing. She put 2 fingers on it as she walked, the way she always did, and she did not take it out and she did not look at it. It was small. It was cool. It had a shape her thumb knew better than her own face. The first hail came at Wester Cross, hard as flung gravel and coming sideways. She put her head down and walked on. It was only weather. She had been out in worse than this and come home laughing. She was thinking about the 11 6 and whether the silversmith might be persuaded to take the tea caddy in the spring, and she was not thinking about the ford at all. In all her 23 years, the ford at Belliver had never once given her any trouble. She heard the water before she saw it, and she stopped walking. That was wrong. Belliver Ford could not be heard from the top of the hill. Not ever. Not in February. She stood in the hail with her hand holding her hood against her jaw, and she listened to a sound that had no business existing, and then she went down the hill to look at it. The stones were gone. Not moved. Covered. The river had come up over all 11 of them and was running the color of strong tea, and it had taken the alder on the far bank and laid it flat, and the noise of it came up through the soles of her boots. She stood there and did the sum. True Whittle Bridge was 4 miles upstream and 4 back, which was 8, on a broken ankle of a road. In the dark, in this, Sarnwell was 1.5 miles beyond the water. Matt, her mother had not been out of that bed since the autumn. She knew this crossing. She had known it since she was 4 years old. 11 stones, and the 3rd one sat deep, and the 7th sat deeper, and the trick that everybody local knew was to cross on the upstream side so the current pressed you onto the stones instead of off them. She untied her cloak and dropped it on the bank. Wet wool drowns people. She put her boots down carefully on the first stone, and the second and the third, and the water came over her knees, and it was so cold that her breath went out of her in one hard piece. She got as far as the 7th stone. She never saw what took her legs. A hurdle, she thought afterwards, or a gate, some farmer's fence come down off the top ground and traveling fast under the brown surface. It hit her behind both knees at once and folded her, and she went in, and the river turned her over twice and put her down hard, and her left foot went into the gap between the 7th stone and the 8th and turned as it went. Meh. Then the river tried to take the rest of her, and her foot stayed where it was. She did not scream. There was nobody within 2 miles to hear her scream, and screaming empties the chest. She got her hands onto the stone. She braced and pulled. The foot did not come. She pulled until something in her ankle made a sound. She felt, rather than heard, and then she stopped pulling and put her forehead against the wet stone and made herself think, wait for the water to drop. That was all. Rivers came up and rivers went down. The water came up over her shoulder. After that she stopped being able to measure time. Her hands went first. She watched them stop working, which was a strange thing to look at your own fingers and instruct them, and see them not obey. The cold got into her teeth, and then behind her eyes. She thought about her mother waiting with the door on the latch. She thought quite clearly and without any drama at all that this was how it was going to happen, in 3 feet of water, half a mile from a road, because of a gate. Then there was a light on the far bank. It swung and steadied. A horse came down the slope too fast and was hauled up hard, and a man's voice said something the water ate. She could not lift her arm. She turned her head, which was all she had left, and the light came off the bank and into the river. He came in up to his chest. He put his hands under her arms and lifted, and she made a noise then, a bad one, and he stopped instantly. He did not ask her what was wrong. He put the lantern up on the stone and went under. She felt him find the ankle. She felt him work at the bootlaces which had swollen shut, and then she felt the flat cold of a knife blade against her shin, and heard the leather part. Her foot came free. He had her out of the water and up the bank, and he tried to get her onto the horse, and she could not grip and could not sit, and she slid sideways off the saddle into his arms like something already dead. He said one word. She did not catch. He set her down. He looped the reins over his forearm, and he picked her up off the ground. Then he carried her. There was 1.5 miles of it, and she was in and out of it the whole way. She remembered his shoulder under her cheek, and the smell of wet horse and wet broadcloth. She remembered the lightning coming twice, and showing her a jaw and a mouth and rain running off the brim of a hat, and no part of that face was familiar to her. She remembered that he talked the entire time, steadily, about nothing, about the state of the road and the price of hay and how much further, and that whenever she stopped answering, he shifted his grip hard enough to hurt her until she answered again. At the top of the last rise, he stopped and got his breath, and looked down at her. He said, "What is your name?" There was a herdsman's hut on the shoulder of the moor with half a roof and a hearth, and he got the door open with his shoulder because she was not able to be set down. He had asked her twice on the way up where she lived, and had got nothing out of her either time that made any sense, and the hut was 1/4 mile off the track, and every other roof on that moor was 3 miles away, and a person as cold as she was does not have 3 miles in her. She understood the decision as he was making it, and could not have told him so. He put her against the wall. He built the fire, the way a man builds a fire when he has done it in weather before, small and mean, and fed slowly, and it caught, and she watched it catch and felt nothing yet. He took off his greatcoat and wrapped it round her, and put a horse blanket over that. He took her hands and rubbed them between his own, hard, and it hurt, and the hurting was the first thing she had felt in an hour, so she did not ask him to stop. He gave her a flask. It was brandy, and it went down like a lit match. "Your foot," he said. "May I?" She nodded. He cut what was left of the boot away and looked at the ankle, and she looked at it too. It had gone the color of a plum and was twice the size it should have been. "Not broken, I think," he said. "Wrenched badly. It will be a great deal worse tomorrow." He tore a strip off his own shirt and bound it, and he did that well too. She began to be able to think again, and thinking, she began to notice things. His linen, his hands, which were clean and unmarked, and had never pulled a rope, the silver flask. The horse standing outside in the lee of the wall was worth more than Sarnwell and everything in it, including the roof and the tea caddy and her mother's garnet cross. He was somebody. She had known that from the moment he went into the water, because nobody goes into a river in February for a stranger unless he has never once in his life had to count what a thing would cost him. She found she did not care in the least who he was. He had put his hands under a woman he could not see, and cut her boot off in the dark. That covered everything else. He did not offer his name. She noticed that too, and was grateful for it, and she thought perhaps he was a man who had learned that a name changes a room. Then he knelt to put the last of the furs on the fire and held his hands out flat to the blaze, and the light went up his fingers, and she saw the ring. A signet. Old gold, worn thin at the shoulders. And cut into the flat of it, small, its head turned and its tail cocked up, was a wren. Eloan looked at that bird for a long moment. She had seen it before. She had seen it, small and silver and no bigger than her thumbnail, and she knew the exact weight of it because it was in the right pocket of her gown 18 inches from her own hand, and it had been in one pocket or another of hers every day for the last 2 years. The fire cracked. The rain went across the roof in a long, hard sweep. "You have not told me your name," he said. "No," said Eloan. "I have not." "Eloan," she said. She had not decided to say it. The brandy had got into her, and the fire had begun at last to reach her hands. And she was not in command of what came out of her mouth. He waited for the rest of it. The waiting went on a little too long. She watched him understand that he had asked for 2 names and been given 1. She watched him decide not to ask a second time. "Eloan," he said. "That will serve for tonight." He went out to see to the horse, and she was left with the fire, and the smell of burning furs, and the wren, Carnmere. The wren was Carnmere. It was cut into the gate-posts at the head of the drive and stamped on every rent book in the parish. She had looked at it all her life the way a person looks at a church tower, never supposing it would come to be 4 feet from her face on a living man's hand. So he was Ansel Renfell. There was nobody else he could be. The Duke of Carnmere had gone into the Belliver water in February and cut her boot off with his own knife and carried her 1.5 miles up onto the moor, and he had talked the whole way about the price of hay so that she would go on answering him, and he did not know her name. He had sworn never to hear it again. 3 Februaries ago, Lord Tristram Renfell had ridden out from Carnmere Court at 9 at night in weather not unlike this. At first light, a peat cutter found his horse standing riderless at the lip of Dosmery Pit, and found Tristram 40 feet below at the bottom of it, long past any help, with his hat still on his head. There had been an inquest in the long room of the inn at Kilmarth. Eloan sat at the back of it, because her father was 2 years in the ground by then, and somebody from the family had been obliged to go. A stable lad named Jago Trewin gave evidence. He stood in front of 30 people with his cap in both hands and said under oath that his lordship had come down to the yard at 9 in excellent spirits, and that when Jago told him the moor road was too thick for riding, his lordship had laughed and said he was going to meet Miss Penhale, and that no weather ever made would stop him. Miss Penhale. That was all. Jago said it once, and the coroner wrote it down, and nobody in that room asked which Miss Penhale because nobody in that room had thought of the younger one at all. Amabel had been 16, Eloan had been 20, and unmarried, and known to walk on the moor alone in all weathers, and known to have a sharp tongue, and known to be poor. The room did its arithmetic before the lad had sat back down. She found the letters 4 days after the funeral in a tin box under the window seat in her sister's room, 11 of them tied with a bootlace. She read all 11 and one sitting on the floor with her back against the wall. She never read them again, and she showed them to nobody. There was one line in the 4th of them that she had thought about nearly every day for 3 years, and she thought about it now, wrapped in the coat of the man who had buried him. After the burial, in the churchyard at Kilmarth, with half the parish standing about in the wet, Ansel Renfell said a thing that carried further than he perhaps intended. He said he would not hear the name Penhale spoken in his hearing while he lived. He said no Penhale would set foot on Carnmere ground. He said that if the name could be struck out of the parish register, he would pay whatever it cost to have it done. Then he put on his hat and walked to his carriage, and he kept every word of it for 3 years. Their rents went to an agent who would not sit down in the house. Amabel died in the spring 2 years ago at 17, of a fever that took 9 days about it. She said nothing at the end. Eloan held her hand and waited to be told something, and was not told anything. Their mother did not know. Honora Penhale believed, as the parish believed, that some misunderstanding had attached itself to her elder daughter and would in time detach itself again. She was 50 and had been in her bed since the autumn. There were precisely 2 people in the world whom the truth could still harm. One of them was dead, the other was the one Elowen would have died to protect. So there was nothing to be done with it. There had never been anything to be done with it. She had worked that out on the floor of her sister's room with the letters in her lap, and nothing since had altered the sum. The door came open, and the weather came in with it, and he ducked under the lintel and shut it with his heel. "The rain is easing," he said. "The water will be down by 10 in the morning, it always is. Yes. You will not walk on that foot for a fortnight." He crouched and put another sod of peat on the fire, and he did not look at her while he said the next part. "I sent no word from the fort. My people will have missed me by midnight. They will come out at first light, and they will start at the water and work up. There will be 4 or 5 of them here by 8 o'clock. Elowen looked into the fire. "From Carnmere," she said. "From Carnmere." She had not asked it as a question. He had not answered it as one. And it seemed to her that she had perhaps 8 hours left in which to be a woman called Elowen, and that after that she would be something else again, and there was nothing on God's earth she could do about the moment it happened. They came at 20 minutes past 7, which was earlier than he had said. Elowen heard them a long way off, 3 horses on the peat track, and did the only thing available to a woman who cannot stand. She turned her face to the wall and lay still and listened. Somebody outside said, "Your Grace," in the flat, unsurprised voice of a man who has spent a night expecting a body and found something better. Ansel Renfell went out, and the door swung to, and she caught perhaps 1 word in 4, cart, straw, nangle. Send Trewin down to the ford for her boot. Trewin! Of all the men who might have been sent to fetch a woman's ruined boot out of the shallows, it was the one who had stood up at the inquest with his cap in both hands. She lay with her cheek against cold stone and reminded herself that Jago Trewin had been 15 that February and had never once looked at her in the long room. The door opened. "They have gone for a cart," he said. "The carriage cannot come up off the road. It will be an hour. Your Grace." He stopped where he was. He did not pretend he had not heard it. And he did not ask her how she had come by it. And she watched him glance once at his own hand and understand exactly how. "Ah," he said, "you need not have troubled to keep it from me." "I did not keep it from you. I did not think of it." He crouched and looked at the ankle without touching it. "You would rather I were nobody. I would rather anybody were nobody. It is easier." Something happened at the corner of his mouth and did not become anything. "There is a thing I must ask of you," she said, "and I would rather ask it before there are servants in the room. There is a midwife in Kilmarth called Senan Caro, behind the cooperage. Send a man to tell her that Elowen is safe, and being looked after and will not be home for a fortnight, and she will carry it where it needs to go before noon." He was quiet for slightly too long. "I could put a note into any house in this county before you have finished your breakfast," he said. "And you ask me to send it to a midwife who will carry it somewhere else?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because that is what I am asking." She held his eyes and did not fill the silence, having nothing to fill it with that would not make things worse. "Senan Caro," he said. "Behind the cooperage. I have not said I will never ask you again." "No," said Elowen. "You have not. The cart came at 8:30 with clean straw in it, and there was no sensible way to get her aboard except the way she had come out of the river." "I know," he said before she could arrange her face. "There is no dignified method. I have looked for one." He lifted her into the straw and put his coat over her, and a boy led the horse, and Ansel Renfell walked at the rail on the moor side. She watched the sky the whole way because she could not sit up to watch anything else. It had gone that scoured blue that comes after such weather, and larks were going up out of the wet gorse, which struck her as unreasonable. Then the gorse gave way to a wall, and the wall to 2 granite pillars with the wren cut into the cap of each, and the cart went through and did not stop. No, Penhale would set foot on Carnmere ground. She had never set foot on it. She was carried over the line at walking pace, lying in straw with a torn ankle, by the man who had made the promise, and she looked up at the underside of the oaks going by, and thought that God, if he was attending that morning, had a very hard sort of humor. The surgeon was a small, round man named Nangle, rather better than a village surgeon had any business being. He unwrapped the strip of shirt and pressed with his thumbs in 4 places. The bone is sound. You have torn the ligature on the outer side and torn it thoroughly. Whoever bound this did it properly, which is more than I can say for most gentlemen. You will not stand on that foot for a fortnight, nor walk well on it for 6 weeks. And you will not be moved out of this house before the fortnight is up, because a jolting cart would undo it all, and I do not care to have my work undone before I am paid for it. A fortnight, 14 days, in a house full of servants, with Jago Truin in the yard, and the whole parish inside 6 miles. You are very quiet, said Nangle. Most young women weep at the 6 weeks I am adding, said Aloan. Lady Adeline Renfell came in at 4 without knocking. She was a small, upright woman in dove gray, with a voice like a coin dropped on a flagstone, and she looked at Eloan the way one looks at a chair that has been moved. You are the woman from the ford. I am. My nephew went into a river in February. He has a sister of 11 to raise and no wife, and a great deal of property. Lady Adeline arranged her hands. I am told nobody knows who you are. I've given him my name. You have given him a Christian name, which is not the same article. I shall not ask for the rest of it. I shall observe only that in my experience there are 2 sorts of person who withhold a surname, and one of them is running from a husband, and the other, said Lady Adeline, is worse. Somebody will bring you soup. Do not attempt the stairs. He came at 7 when the light had gone, and stood inside the door rather than sitting. Caro had the message before 10. My man waited until she had her shawl on and was away up the road, and then came back and told me so. Eloan shut her eyes a moment. It was the first wholly good thing that had happened in 2 days. Thank you. Nangle has told me a fortnight. He turned his hat over once. I'm going to put 3 things to you, and I would like you to hear all 3 before answering any, because I think you are the sort of woman who refuses in order. That is fair. The first is money. Your boot, your gown, your cloak on the bank at Belliver. Whatever the fortnight cost you in work not done. That is not charity. It is arithmetic, and I would offer the same to a carter. No. You said you would hear all 3. I did. That was not an answer. That was a no. He very nearly smiled. The second is that you stay until Nangle releases you, and that nobody in this house asks you one question you have not offered to answer. Not my aunt, not the servants, not me. She had not expected that, and it took her a moment. Yes, thank you. The third. He stopped and looked at the hat and then at her. You told Caro a fortnight without hesitating, which means somebody is expecting you who cannot come and find out why you have not come. You have been lying there since noon, working out how a person is looked after for 14 days by nobody. Tell me where, and I will send a carriage and a nurse and have them brought here and put in the room across this passage, and they will be cared for exactly as well as you are, and it will cost me almost nothing at all. The fire moved in the grate, somewhere below. A door shut and a dog got up off a flagstone floor. It was the only thing in the world she wanted, and she could see it entire. Her mother lifted out of that damp room and sat down somewhere warm with a nurse and a fire that did not have to be counted in sticks. The apothecary's 11 and 6 paid and forgotten, and her mother would give the name at the door. She would give it gladly, in the first breath, proudly, because she had never once in her life understood that it was a thing to be ashamed of. No, said Eloan. He did not move. Say that again. No, thank you. No, Eloan. It was the first time he had used it. I have just watched you want something, yes, and refuse it, yes, Will you tell me why? No, she said. Then she waited for it. She had lived 3 years among people who required reasons, who felt owed them, who took the withholding of one as an insult and repaid the insult with interest. She waited for him to demand it, and she had already settled that she would say nothing, and that at the end of the fortnight she would go. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he put the hat under his arm. Then I withdraw it, he said, and I will not raise it again, and I will not have it raised at you by anybody else under this roof. He was at the door when she said, Why not? Because you refused it in about a second and a half. Nobody refuses that fast, unless the cost of accepting is worse than the thing itself. I do not know what your cost is. I am not going to make you name it in order to be let alone. He shut the door quietly behind him. Aloan lay in the dark a long while with her hand in the pocket of the gown somebody had folded over the chair, 2 fingers resting on a small, cool shape of silver, and she thought she would have given a great deal for him to have turned out an unkind man. She learned the house by ear before she saw any of it. Carnmere Court was not what she had expected, and what she had expected was marble. It smelled, instead of cold plaster and lamp oil, and faintly and constantly of apples stored somewhere above her, and it made a great deal of noise for a house so nearly empty. Dogs got up and lay down again. A clock on the landing struck the hour 7 minutes fast, and nobody had corrected it, which told her more about the household than a week of looking would have. On the second day, a woman named Sowden, who was the housekeeper, and who had a face like a closed drawer, brought her a gown of good gray wool that fitted almost exactly, and did not say whose it had been, and Eloan did not ask. She was helped into it, and she moved one small, cool thing out of the pocket of the ruined gown and into the pocket of the new one before Sowden carried the old one away. And she washed her own face in hot water for the first time in 2 days, and she sat propped up in a chair by the window with her foot on a stool, and ate a plate of mutton and barley, all of it, and had a second plate, and was not ashamed of either. Nobody asked her one question. Not the surgeon who came on alternate days. Not Sowden, not the girl who did the fire. Nobody said the other thing either. In 3 days, in that house, she did not once hear the name Tristram, and she began after a while to notice the shape of the gap where it should have been. Sowden spoke of the West End as the. The girl who did the fire said his lordship's dogs, and then went slightly pink and said the old dogs instead. The whole west end of the house was shuttered, and the door at the far end of Aloan's own passage was locked, and she knew it was locked because on the 3rd afternoon somebody tried the handle twice, quietly, and then went away again, and the footsteps were too light to be a man's. On the 4th day, the handle of her own door turned instead. A girl of about 11 came in with the extreme deliberateness of somebody who has decided in advance to be unembarrassed. She was thin and dark, and she had a leather notebook under her arm and a pencil stub behind her ear, and she came and stood at the end of the chair and looked directly at Eloan's face. Nobody had looked directly at Eloan's face in 3 years. "You are the woman out of the river," said the girl. I am, Marin. Ansel is my brother. I have not been allowed in here because Aunt Adeline says you are recovering, which she says in a particular way." She sat down on the footstool without being asked, avoiding the bandaged ankle with a good deal of care. "Are you recovering?" "Slowly, then you have time." Marin opened the notebook flat on her knees. "How many birds do you know?" Eloan looked at her. "By sight?" "By sight, and also by call, and also which are here in February, because most people say a thing is here in February, and it is not." Marin turned the book round and held it up. It was ruled into narrow columns in a careful hand, and it went on for a great many pages. "I have 409 entries. Nobody in this house will do it with me." "Sowden says birds are birds, Snipe," said Eloan. "Down in the wet ground below Believer, if you go at dusk and stand still. Field fair in the thorn along the top road, in numbers, this month, and you will not have the wheat here until April, whatever anybody tells you." There was a silence of perhaps 2 seconds. Then Marin took the pencil from behind her ear and began writing very fast, and did not look up, and said, "You may stay." She stayed until the light went. She asked what Aloan's name was, and Aloan said, "Aloan," and Marin wrote that in the notebook too, at the top of a fresh page, with the date beside it, as though she were an entry. At the door she stopped, holding the handle with both hands. "Aunt Ottiline is cross about the room," she said. "The room?" "This one. Sowden put you in it because of the stairs and the fire." Marin looked round at once, without any particular weight, the way children look at things they have looked at all their lives. "It was my brother Tristram's." Marin came every day after that, at 11 in the morning, and again when her lessons were done, and she came without knocking because it had not occurred to her that she should. They did the birds. Aloan had spent 3 years walking a moor. Nobody wanted to share with her, and it turned out all of it was worth something. She knew which thorn the fieldfare used, and which it did not. She knew the snipe went up out of the wet ground at Belliver, with a noise like a wet finger drawn across glass. Marin wrote all of it down in her narrow columns, with the date and the weather beside it, and twice rubbed out something she had written the previous year, and put Aloan's version in instead, which Aloan understood was a considerable event. On the second morning of it she found out where the notebook had come from. "Tristram began it," said Marin, not looking up. "I was 8. He said we should do the whole estate properly and it would take years, and I said how many years, and he said all of them." She sharpened the pencil stub with a small penknife over the fire irons carefully, catching the shavings. "That was the summer before he died." Marin blew the dust off the point. "You may say it. I am not made of glass. It is only that nobody else will. So I have got out of the habit. Nobody says his name. Ansel does not. So nobody does." She wrote something. "It is not because he has forgotten. It is because of the lady." Eloin sat very still in the chair with her foot on the stool and the gray wool gown across her knees, and did not move at all. The lady? There was a lady he was going to meet, the night of it, on the moor. Everybody knows. Ansel said in the churchyard that he would never say her name, and now nobody in the parish says it either, so I do not know it, and I am not permitted to ask. Marin considered the page. "I asked Sowden once, and she went out of the room and shut the door quite hard. I think she is wicked, the lady. I think she asked him to come out in that weather, and then did not go, and it cost him his life. That is what I think." The fire ticked. Somewhere below, a door. "Do you think she is wicked?" said Marin. "I think," said Eloin, and stopped, and started again. "I think nobody in that churchyard had heard her say one word for herself." Marin thought about this with the pencil against her lower lip. "That is true," she said. "Nobody had." Then she went back to the columns, and the matter appeared to be finished, and Eloin sat in the dead man's room with her hands loose in her lap and her heart going like a bird against a window. On the 6th day they argued about a woodcock. It was a stupid argument, and it went on 20 minutes. Marin was wrong and would not have it, and produced 2 earlier entries in support, and then a third that disproved her own case, and Eloin laughed at her, and Marin saw the trap she had walked into and put her face in the notebook, and laughed too, the onking, undignified laugh of a child who has stopped attending to how she sounds. That was when Eloin looked past her at the open door. Ansel Renfell was standing on the half-landing outside with a bundle of unopened letters in one hand. He was not looking into the room. He was looking at the wall opposite, at nothing, in the way of a man who has stopped walking without deciding to. His face was doing nothing at all, and Eloin had learned enough of that face to know that this was what it did instead of everything. 3 years. His sister had been 8. He did not come in. He stood there while the laughing went on, and then went away up the stairs very quietly, and Marin never knew he had been there. Eloin said nothing about it, and found later that evening that she had been holding the arm of the chair, hard enough to mark her palm. "Aloan," said Marin at the door, on the 7th morning. "I want to ask you a thing, and you are not to say I must ask Ansel, because I have asked Ansel, and he said no, ask. There is a room at the end of this passage." Marin was picking at the paint on the door frame and not looking at her. "His notes are in it, from that summer, all the counts he did in June and July, that never got copied into the book. And they are lying there in the dark going yellow. And it is 3 years, and it is not a shrine. It is a room, Marin. Soden has the key on a ring in the still room." The girl looked up. "You are the only person in this house who does not go strange when I say his name. I am asking you to help me." He came on the 7th evening with a stick. It was a good blackthorn with a worn horn handle, and he stood it against the arm of her chair without ceremony. "Nangle says you may put 1/4 of your weight on it from tomorrow," he said. "That was my grandmother's. She was a bad-tempered woman who broke her hip at 70 and walked to church on that for 9 years afterwards, out of spite. I thought you might get on with it." Eloan put her hand round the handle. "It fitted. Thank you. You have 6 days left." He sat down, which he had not done before, in the chair on the other side of the fire, and put his elbows on the arms of it. "I find I want to spend one of them telling you something, and I have been trying for 2 days to think of a reason to give you for it, and I have not got one. So I shall simply say it, and you may stop me. Say it. My brother died 3 years ago in February. His name was Tristram. He was 22. He said the name evenly, like a man setting down something heavy on a table with both hands. He rode out from this house at 9 at night in weather very like the night I found you, and he put his horse at the ground above Dosmery Pit in the dark, and he went over the edge of it, and a peat cutter found him at first light. I am sorry. I have not finished, and you will not be sorry when I have." He looked into the fire. "A lad in my stable heard him say as he went that he was riding to meet a woman. He gave her surname. He gave it once. Nobody asked anything further because it did not occur to anybody that it needed asking, and by the end of that week the whole parish had settled on a particular young woman of that name, and so had I." Eloan kept her hands still in her lap. She had had a great deal of practice. "And then," said Ansel Renfell, "I did a thing I would like to tell you about, because I have told nobody, and because in 6 days you will go out of that door, and I shall never see you again. And it seems to me that is a species of confessional."
"You need not."
"No, but I am going to." He turned his hat. "I stood in a churchyard with my brother 2 hours in the ground, and I said out loud, so that 30 people heard me, that I would not have that name spoken in my hearing while I lived. That was the first thing. It was a vile thing to do, and I knew it was vile. Within the week, and by then it was said, and a duke cannot unsay a thing in a churchyard without it becoming a fresh piece of news, and so I let it stand. I have let it stand for 3 years, because unsaying, it would have been embarrassing. That is the whole of my reason. Embarrassment." He stopped. The clock on the landing struck, and was 7 minutes fast. "That is not the worst of it," he said. "No, in the June after he died, there was a man the other side of Trewhiddle, decent enough, small estate, who was on the point of making that young woman an offer of marriage. I heard of it. I had it confirmed. And I wrote to him. He said it flatly. 4 lines. I told him what the parish believed, and did not trouble to add that it was believed on the word of a boy of 15, who had said one word once. I signed it. I sent it. And the offer was not made." The fire moved. Eloan found that she could not hear the clock any more, or the dogs, or anything at all. "You wrote to him," she said. "I did. Why are you telling me?" "Because I am ashamed of it, and I have discovered that a man can carry a thing 3 years without once saying it aloud, and that the carrying does nobody any good whatever." He was quiet a moment. "And because of something that happened here in October, which I shall tell you if you want it. I want it. I went to the stable and I asked the lad. Trowen, he is 18 now. I asked him to tell me again, word for word, exactly what my brother said in the yard that night, and he told me, and it was the same, and it was one word, a surname. And I stood in my own stable and understood that I had built 3 years on a single word out of the mouth of a frightened boy, and that I had never once gone to that woman's door and asked her whether it was true, because if it were not true, then my brother had simply been a young fool on a bad horse at a pit in the dark, and there would be nobody left to be angry with except him, and I would rather have hated a stranger. He put his hands over his face a moment and took them down again. "So that is what I am," he said. "And you know it a week before you go, which is a piece of cowardice I have arranged for myself quite deliberately." Eloin looked at the fire for a long time. "May I tell you something that is not an absolution, please?" "I had a sister," she said. "She died 2 years ago in the spring, at 17 of a fever, 9 days. I sat with her the whole of it, and at the end she did not say anything to me, and I have spent 2 years discovering how much of my life is going to be spent waiting to be told something by somebody who cannot tell me. I am sorry. There is a thing about the dead that nobody explains to you beforehand." She turned the horn handle of the stick under her palm. "They cannot be defended. You can defend a living person badly, and they can correct you. The dead just lie there and let you say what you like about them, and every single word you say goes on to them permanently, and they never get a say in it. So a person who knows a thing about somebody dead has to decide entirely alone, with nobody to consult, whether the truth of it or the quiet of it is the kinder gift." She looked up at him. "And they get it wrong sometimes for years. And there is no way of knowing." He did not move at all. "You are not talking about my brother," he said. "No, but you are talking about something." "Yes, Eloin, very quietly. Will you tell me your name?" The wind went round the west end of the house and found the shutters, and she heard them knock. "Ask me on the last day," she said. He looked at her for what felt like a very long while. "The last day," he said. "Very well." And he took up the candle and went out, and Eloin sat with the blackthorn stick across her knees and understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that she had just given herself 6 days and had no idea on earth what she intended to do with them. She learned to walk again in a house belonging to a man she was deceiving. It went in stages, and all of them were undignified. On the 8th day, she got as far as the window and back. On the 10th, she came down the great stairs, one at a time on the stick, with Marin walking backwards in front of her, giving instructions nobody had asked for, and stood in the hall of Carnmere Court on her own 2 feet with the wren cut into the stone over the door behind her, and thought about that, and went in to breakfast. The evenings settled into a shape. He read to her, not poetry, which she would have found unbearable, but the county business, because she had said on the 8th evening that she was going mad from having nothing to think about, and he had taken her at her word with what she came to understand was characteristic literalism. So he read her the drainage estimates for the tree whittle bottoms and the tenders for the corn store roof and the accounts of the almshouse charity at Kilmarth. And on the 2nd evening of it, she stopped him. "Say that again." "The almshouse. Coals, 40 pounds. For how many houses?" 6. "Then somebody is stealing from you," said Eloin. "Or somebody cannot add, and I would look at the adding first because it is more common." She held out her hand for the book. "My father lost a farm by not looking at a column of figures. I have looked at every column I have been given since I was 17. 6 houses do not burn 40 pounds of coal, they burn about 22. And if you turn back a page, I expect you will find last year was 22. And the year before that, he turned back a page." He was quiet for slightly too long, which she had learned was the thing he did. Instead of exclaiming, £21 and some shillings, he said, "Then you have a clerk with a difficulty." He shut the book on his finger and looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything, and it went on a beat past the point where either of them could have pretended it was about coal. After that, he brought the books to her without being asked. He never touched her. Not once in a fortnight he handed her nothing directly. He put things down on the table beside her, and stood back so that she could take them up herself, and she understood this was deliberate and that it cost him something, and she did not know what to do with the understanding, so she put it where she put everything. Twice in those days the thing nearly came apart. The first was on the 9th afternoon, in the yard, where she had gone to stand in the sun. A young man came out of the harness room with her boot in his hands, or what was left of it, cleaned and dried and quite beyond saving, and stopped dead when he saw her. He was tall and sandy and about 18, and his ears went red. "Beg pardon, miss, is that mine?" His Grace said, "Fetch it up. It is spoilt." He turned it over as though he might find some other opinion on the other side of it. He was looking at her face, now quite openly, in the way of a person who has begun a thought and cannot get to the end of it. "Beg pardon, miss," he said again. "Have you been at Kilmarth Market?" Everybody has been at Kilmarth Market. Aye, he was still looking. Aye, that will be it. He put the boot down and went, and Eloan stood in the sun and found that her hands were shaking, and told herself that Jago Truan had been 15 in a crowded room 3 Februaries ago and had spent the whole of it looking at his own cap. That evening Souden came up with the candles and paused at the door in the manner of a woman discharging a duty she disapproves of. "Truan was asking below stairs who you were," she said. I told him it was no business of his, and it is none of mine either, and I have said as much to her ladyship twice this week. Her ladyship has asked. Her ladyship, said Souden, has written 4 letters this week and had them taken to the post at True Whittle rather than put in the bag with his grace's. I could not tell you what is in them. Good night, miss. The door shut. Eloan sat in the dead man's room with the blackthorn stick against her knee and counted 4 days left. 4 days, a stable boy with an unfinished thought, 4 letters gone to the post by the back road, and a locked door at the end of the passage with a child on the other side of it, who had asked her for help and had not yet been given an answer. She got up on the 11th morning and went and looked at that door for a long while. Then she went down to the still room and found the ring of keys on the nail. She had the keys in her pocket for 4 minutes before Souden came to say that her ladyship would be glad of her in the breakfast room. The breakfast room was at the cold end of the house, and had not been used for breakfast in years, and Lady Adeline had had a fire lit in it, which was the first thing Eloan noticed and the thing she liked least. A woman who has a fire lit in an unused room intends to be there a while. "Sit," said Lady Adeline. "You are on a stick, and I am not a monster. Sit down." Eloan sat. The keys were a hard cold weight against her hip. "I shall be direct, because I am too old to be anything else, and because you have 3 days left in this house." Lady Adeline folded her hands. "My nephew is in love with you." Eloan said nothing at all. "You will not insult me by looking surprised. He has read the drainage estimates aloud to you. For a week. Ansel Renfell has not voluntarily said 200 words in a row to a woman since his brother died, and he is currently doing it nightly to a person whose surname he does not know, and I have watched him carry a chair from the estate room into your passage with his own hands, because the one in your room sat you too low." The old woman's mouth was quite flat. "I have known him since he was an hour old. Do not tell me what I am looking at. I have not told you anything. No, you are very good at that." Lady Adeline let a moment go by. "I have made enquiries." "I know. 4 letters to the post at True Whittle, by the back road. Souden," said Lady Adeline without heat, "is loyal to the house and not to me, which is as it should be, and is inconvenient." She adjusted a ring. "I have had 2 answers back. Neither of them is anything. There is no woman of your description missing from any family of consequence in this county, and there is no husband looking for anybody, and no scandal of the ordinary sort. Do you know what that has done to me? No, it has frightened me," said Lady Adeline, "because a woman with an ordinary disgrace behind her can be managed. A woman with no discoverable history at all is either nobody, which you plainly are not, or she is concealing something that is worse than any of the things I know how to look for." The fire popped. Eloan kept her hands still. "Let me tell you," said Lady Adeline, "what my nephew is, since he will not have told you himself. He has told me. I beg your pardon. He has told me the churchyard, the oath. The letter he wrote in June to the gentleman the other side of Truewhiddle, 4 lines signed, that stopped an offer of marriage from being made to a woman he had never met." Eloan watched the old woman's face and had the satisfaction, which she was not proud of seeing it move. "He told me on the 7th evening. He told me because he is ashamed of it, and had carried it 3 years and could not carry it any longer. So you may keep that piece and use it on somebody else." The clock on the landing struck the hour, faintly 2 rooms away, and was wrong as usual. "He told you that?" said Lady Adeline. "Yes, he has not told me that." She looked at the fire for a moment. Then she said in an entirely different voice, "Then I shall tell you my part. Since we are trading, I thought it was thin." "You thought what was thin?" "All of it. The whole edifice." Lady Adeline's hands were quite still in her lap. "I sat in this house in the February of that year, and I listened to 30 people agree with one another about a young woman none of them had spoken to, on the word of a stable child who had said one word once. And I thought, this is thin. I thought it at the time. I have a memory of thinking it. At that window, in that light. And I said nothing, because my nephew was in a condition I had not seen a man in before, and because the one thing that was holding him upright was being angry with somebody, and I judged that taking it away from him would have killed him." She looked up. "I have had 3 years to consider whether that was a judgment or a cowardice. I am 61. I no longer expect to reach a conclusion." Eloan found that her eyes had gone hot, and that this was the last thing on earth she could afford. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I am about to be very unkind to you," said Lady Adeline, "and I did not want to do it from a position of pretended cleanliness." She leaned forward slightly. "Whatever you are hiding, he will not forgive it. You cannot know that. I can. Listen to me. He is not a cruel man, and that is precisely the difficulty. If he were cruel, you might survive it. He is a man who was wrong once publicly about a name, and stayed wrong for 3 years out of embarrassment, and it has cost him his brother twice over, once to the pit and once to the silence. And a man who has just begun, at 31, to understand that about himself, will not survive discovering that he has been made a fool of a second time in his own house by somebody he was carrying up a staircase." She sat back. "It is not the concealment he will not forgive. It is what the concealment will make him think of himself. You have 3 days. Tell him, or go on Thursday, and never come back, but do not let him find it." Eloan sat for a moment. Then she put her hand on the blackthorn and got up, which took her some time, and neither of them pretended otherwise. "Lady Adeline?" "Yes. May I ask you one thing?" "You may." "In February, at that window in that light." Eloan steadied herself on the stick. "Did you believe it?" Lady Adeline Ranfel looked at her for a long moment, and something went across the front of her face and was put away again. "No," she said, "I did not." "Thank you," said Eloan. She went out of the breakfast room and down the passage and up the stairs, a step at a time, and she was on the last of them, out of breath, with her hand on the rail and her mind entirely elsewhere, when she raised her head and looked along the landing. The door at the end of the passage was standing open. Marin was sitting on the floor of her dead brother's room, in a bar of gray light with papers spread round her in a half circle, perfectly happy, entirely absorbed, and she looked up and said, "You left them on the nail." "I only borrowed them. Marin, the June counts are all here, all of them. He did the whole of the top wood on the 14th, and it is not in the book." She held up a sheet covered in a young man's untidy hand. 3 years it has been sitting here. The room was cold and smelled of dust and old wool, and it was not a shrine at all. It was a room, a coat on a hook, a pair of spurs, a shelf of books with a marker still in one of them. Eloan got down onto the floor beside her, because it was easier than standing, and began gathering the sheets into order by their dates, because that was a thing she could do with her hands, while her heart did what it was doing. They were still on the floor when Ansel Renfell came in. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at his sister sitting in the middle of it. He looked at the coat on the hook, once quickly, the way a man looks at a thing he has decided in advance not to look at. "Marin, I know," but she helped me. "And it is not a shrine, it is a room," and his counts were going yellow in the dark for nothing. There was a silence of about 4 seconds. "Show me the 14th of June, said her brother, and that was how it happened. Not with a shout, not with a discovery. Marin scrambled up onto her knees to hand the sheet across, and her elbow went into the little pile Eloan had made, and Eloan put both hands out to catch it, and the movement pulled her gown taut against her hip, and something small and bright came out of the pocket and went across the bare boards with a sound like a dropped coin, and stopped against the leg of the washstand. Marin got to it first, because children always do. She picked it up and turned it over, and went absolutely still, in the way of a person whose body has understood something before her mouth has. "This is Tristram's," she said. Eloan did not move. "This is Tristram's wren." He wore it in his neckcloth. It was not found. Marin turned to her brother, holding it up on her flat palm entirely without accusation, in the pure, blank astonishment of an 11-year-old who has come upon a fact. "Ansel, it was not found. You said it was lost in the pit." Ansel Renfell came across the room and took the pin out of his sister's hand. He looked at it for a long time. Then he closed his fist round it and looked down at Eloan on the floor with her hands full of a dead man's papers. "Marin," he said, "go down to Souden. But the 14th of June is here. Now, please." She went. She went slowly and looked back twice, and the door did not quite shut behind her. He said, "Get up." "I cannot get up quickly. You will have to wait." He waited while she got her hand onto the washstand and her weight onto the stick, and came up off the floor by degrees, and he did not offer, and she had not expected him to. "Your name," he said. There it was, on the 11th day, not the 14th, in his brother's room in the cold. She had spent 3 years learning how to say it to people who had already decided, Eloan Penhale. Nothing happened in his face at all, and that was the worst of it. She had braced for the parish thing, the flat, closing look. Instead, there was a man standing 4 feet away, holding a silver pin in his fist, while everything went out of him. "Penhale," he said. "Yes, you have been in this house 11 days. You lay in a cart, and let me carry you through my own gates." "I could not walk," said Eloan. "You may hold a great many things against me." "Not that one. I asked you your name in a hut on the moor. And I gave you the true half of it, and I have never once told you a lie. And if you go back over every hour of the last 11 days, you will find that is so." Her voice was not entirely steady, and she let it not be. "I asked you for a midwife instead of a rider. I refused your money. I refused a nurse and a carriage for my mother, who has not been out of her bed since the autumn, and who would have been warm for a fortnight, and I refused it in a second and a half, and you noticed, and you did not ask me why. You have not been deceived, Your Grace. You have been unasked. You knew what I had said in that churchyard. Every word. I have had it said to me across a counter in Kilmarth by a woman weighing out flour." He opened his hand and looked at the wren again. "Then explain to me," he said very quietly, "how my brother's pin comes to be in your pocket." And Eloan Penhale stood in that cold room with her whole life in her hands and found she could not do it. Not the 4th letter, not a girl of 16, not to a man in that condition with the door not quite shut, and a child of 11 on the other side of it who had spent 3 years believing her brother died for a wicked lady, and who would rather believe that, Eloan thought, than believe he died coming to help a little girl who lost her nerve and stayed in her bed. "No," she said. "No, not today. Not like this. Not with Marin in the passage. Marin is not in the passage, she is. He turned his head. After a moment there were footsteps going away down the landing, quickly, and then stopping, and then going on. He stood a while longer. Nangle says Thursday, he said at last. I will send you on Thursday. Until Thursday you will be looked after exactly as you have been, and nobody in this house will say one word to you about any of it, and that includes my aunt, and it includes me, Ansel. You will not use that, he said, and went out and shut the door properly this time. The carriage came at 9 on Thursday. He was not in it and not at the door. Lady Ottoline was. She came down the steps in the cold with a shawl over her arm and put it round Alohan's shoulders herself, which nobody had expected, and said, You are Honora Penhale's daughter. I am. I danced with your father once. He was a bad dancer and a decent man. The old woman tucked the shawl in with 2 hard movements. I told you not to let him find it. Now one thing more. He has not slept since Monday, and he has been in the west end of this house every night with the shutters open, and he did not come down this morning because he could not trust his own face. That is not forgiveness. It is not the other thing either. She stood back. Go home to your mother. Sarnwell in February was very cold and very small. Alohan knelt by her mother's bed and let herself be held and cried for the first time in a fortnight, and then got up and lit the fire and mended the latch on the yard door that had wanted mending since Christmas, because there was nobody else. Her mother asked where she had been. Carnmere, said Alohan, because she had done with lying by omission, and then had to hold both her mother's hands for a quarter of an hour and explain that nobody had been cruel to her, and she had not been turned out into the road, and yes, she had eaten mutton and barley twice at a sitting. Then 12 days went by, and nothing happened at all. She counted them, and was not proud of counting them. She did the work and sat with her mother and read to her in the evenings, and every day she thought about the 4th letter in the tin box under the window seat, and about a man standing in a cold room with a silver pin in his fist, and about the fact that she had refused, in the end, to tell the truth to the one person alive who had a right to it. On the 13th day she went down to Belver. The water had gone right down. It always did. It was a clear, low afternoon with no wind in it, and the river went over the ford 4 inches deep, and every one of the 11 stones stood up dry on top, and she could see the gap between the 7th and the 8th, where her foot had gone. She stood on the bank and looked at it a while. I have been to Trewen twice, said Ansel Renfeld behind her. She did not turn round straight away. She had known the sound of that horse for some time, and had not let herself believe it. He had come along the top road and left the animal standing. He looked as if he had not slept in a week, and he carried Marin's leather notebook under his arm. Twice the first time I asked what my brother said. The second time I asked where he said he was going, which in 3 years it has not once occurred to anybody in this county to ask, and he told me, and it took 4 seconds. Tristram said he was going down to Belliver. Alohan shut her eyes. Belliver, said Ansel. Not the moor road to Sarnwell. Belliver. At 9 at night, in February, which is nowhere a man rides to call on a young lady, and is precisely the road he takes at speed in the dark if he must cut over the top ground above Dosmary Pit to get there quickly. Yes, said Alohan. And on Tuesday my sister came into the estate room with this. He held up the notebook. She has kept it since she was 8, and she puts the date on everything, and writes in the margins, because she cannot bear a blank space. And on the page for the 12th of July, 3 years and 7 months ago, beside a lesser whitethroat in the churchyard hedge at Kilmarth, she has written in pencil that Tristram gave his wren to the little Penhale girl who was crying. The river went over the stones. Your sister, he said, who died at 17, of a fever, 9 days. Her name was Amabel, said Alohan. She was 16. He was kind to her at a fete, because she was crying about something that would not have mattered to anybody over the age of 16, and he gave her the pin out of his own neckcloth because it seemed a fine thing to do. She wrote to him 11 times in 7 months. He answered 4, and every one of the 4 is a letter a decent young man writes to a child he is trying to be gentle with. Her voice went. She let it. And in February my father's cousin was to take her to Bristol, and she did not want to go. And she wrote him a 4th letter that I have thought about every day for 3 years, and in it she said that she would go down to Belvoir at midnight and walk to the coast by herself, and that if he did not come, she would go alone, and he would never hear of her again. Ansel Renfell put his hand over his mouth. She was 16, said Aloan. She did not go. She lay in her bed all night with her boots on, and lost her nerve, and in the morning a peat cutter found him at the bottom of Dawsbury Pit. And she never said one word to anybody, not to me, not in 2 years, not at the end when I sat with her, 9 days waiting to be told something. I found the letters 4 days after his funeral, and by then it was already my name in the churchyard, and there was nobody left to protect but a girl of 16 who could not have survived it. And then there was nobody left to protect but my mother. She looked at the water. So I let it stand. For 3 years, I got it wrong, and I got it wrong for years, and there was no way of knowing. He did not say anything for a long time. He was going to fetch her home, he said. Yes. He was 22, and it was thick as a hedge out there, and he put a horse over the top ground in the dark because a child wrote him a frightened letter. His voice was not working properly either. I have spent 3 years telling myself my brother died a fool. He did not. No. He looked out over the fort. He died the best of us, and I stood in a churchyard and said your name and made a monument to the wrong thing. The river went over the 11 stones, and the light began to go off the top of the moor. Eloan Penhale, said Ansel Renfell. I am not going to ask you for anything today, and I want to say why, so that you are not left guessing at it. What I said out loud, in front of 30 people. And a thing said out loud has to be unsaid the same way, or it is not unsaid at all. So on Sunday, I am going to stand up in the churchyard at Kilmarth in the same place, and say that I was wrong, and say your sister's name, and say what my brother was doing on the road to Belvoir. And then it will be done. And then I will come to Sarnwell, and knock on your door and ask you a question, and you may say whatever you like to it. They will talk about you for 20 years. Yes, he said. That is the price, and it is not a large one, and I have been 3 years working out that the reason I did not pay it earlier was that I did not want to look ridiculous, which is, as it turns out, the whole of my character, and I am too old to go on with it. He came across the grass then, and stopped, and did not touch her. He opened his hand. The silver wren lay on his palm, small and worn, no bigger than her thumbnail. This was hers, he said. It is not mine to keep, and it is not mine to give back to you either, because it never came to you from me, but I will not have it in a pocket any more. He lifted it, and she stood still, and he pinned it through the wool of the shawl Lady Adeline had wrapped round her, at the shoulder where it could be seen from the road. Then he stood back. Sunday, he said. On Sunday it rained a little and then stopped, and there were more people in the churchyard at Kilmarth than had been at the burial. Word had gone round as word does, and the church emptied and did not disperse, and Ansel Renfell walked up between the graves to the place he had stood 3 Februaries before, hat in hand and no paper. He said it plainly, and it took 4 minutes. He said the name Amabel Penhale out loud twice, and said she had been a child of 16 who wrote 11 letters to a young man who had been kind to her, and that there was nothing in one of them any parent there would blush at. He said his brother Tristram had died on the road to Belvoir going to fetch her home, and that any man present with a sister might consider whether he would have gone himself. He said he had let a wrong name stand 3 years, because unsaying it would have made him look a fool, and that he had written a letter the June after the funeral which cost a woman an offer of marriage, and had written to that gentleman to tell him so. But then he said, I will not ask any of you to forget that I said the first thing. I am asking you to remember that I said this one. He put his hat on and came down through the graves. Nobody clapped, because it was a churchyard. But an old man named Caro, who was Senon's father, and who had not lifted his hat to a Renfell in 40 years on principle, lifted it. He came to Sarnwell on the Monday, and knocked, and her mother's nurse let him in, and he stood in a parlor with a damp patch in one corner, and a chair with a mended leg, and appeared to notice neither. "But, done the thing I said I would do," he said. "So now I am asking. Not because you pulled my brother's name out of the mud, and not because I owe you a boot, because I sat in a room with you every evening for a fortnight and was asked a question about the price of coal that I could not answer, and I find I would rather be found out by you than agreed with by anybody else alive." Elowen looked at him for a moment. She had had 13 days to decide, and had used all of them. "Yes," she said. He did not cross the room. He stood where he was and shut his eyes for about 2 seconds, which from him was a considerable display, and then he said, "Your mother is upstairs. May I go and ask her as well? She will want to have been asked." Lady Adeline Renfell came to Sarnwell on the Wednesday, which nobody had asked her to do, and sat in a damp parlor on a chair she plainly found inadequate. I shall say this once, so attend. He was wrong out loud, and has now been right out loud, which is more than most men manage. I was wrong quietly. I sat at a window in February and thought, this is thin, and said nothing for 3 years, and no churchyard will be told about that, and so I am telling you. In a cold room over indifferent tea, you will find me difficult. I shall never once be warm, because I have not the equipment for it. But you may take it as settled that I am on your side of the room, and the first person in London who supposes otherwise will discover it in front of witnesses. Honora Penhale came to Carnmere Court in April in a closed carriage with a nurse and a great many blankets, and gave her name at the door, in the first breath, gladly, exactly as her daughter had known she would. Soden said, "Yes, madam, we are expecting you," and took her in. She was told about Amabel by Ansel himself, at her own request, sitting by her bed with his hands on his knees. Elowen was not in the room, and never asked what was said, and her mother never told her except that once in the summer Honora said, out of nowhere, "He told it to me as a good thing." There was one more thing, and Elowen came by it, the way she came by most things sideways, from somebody who had no interest in telling her anything but the truth. It was the following February, in the stable yard on a bright, hard morning. Jago Trewen, 19 now and head of nothing but going to be head of everything, was doing something unnecessary to a bridal. "Will you want the gig Thursday, your grace?" "I think not. Why Thursday?" Jago looked at her, and then looked at the bridle, and went red to the ears in the way she had first seen him go red in that yard, with a ruined boot in his hands. "Beg pardon." "I thought you would know it by now." "Know what?" "His Grace has the grey out on the 9th of February. Every year, he turned the bridle over. He goes after dark, whatever the weather is doing, up the top ground to the pit, and he stands there a while, and then he comes down by Belliver, because that is the road home from it. 3 year he has done it, and the 3rd were the night of your storm. I saddle the horse and say nothing to nobody, and Souden puts a light in the gun-room window against him, coming back late. He shrugged, miserably. Nobody thought to say it to you. Elowen stood in the stable yard in the cold sunshine, and did not say anything at all. "You will have known that," said Jago, unhappy. "Surely you will have known that." "No," said Elowen, "he would not have. There is no telling in him at all." She did not raise it that week, or the next. She raised it in March in the estate room, with the almshouse accounts open between them and the coals at £22 where they belonged. "The 9th of February," she said. He did not look up. "What of it? You were not out in that storm by accident." "No, you had been at the pit." "Yes, you were coming home." She turned a page, and did not look at him either, because she had learned how this had to be done. Every year, in the dark, whatever the weather is doing. It is one evening, said Ansel Renfell, out of 365, and it is not a large thing, and I would rather it were not made into one. No, said Aloan, I only wanted it said in the room once. He wrote a figure in the margin. Then he put the pen down and looked at her, and neither of them said anything else about it, then or ever, and it sat between them for the rest of their lives, like a stone put in a wall on purpose. Marin's notebook reached 1,000 entries the summer after that. She marked it as she marked everything, on paper and without ceremony. Aloan found the book open on the window seat at a fresh page, and at the top of it, in a hand that had got a good deal better in 2 years, Marin had written the date and then a list of everyone who had ever contributed to the record. Tristram Renfell, Marin Renfell, Aloan Renfell. And beneath those, in smaller letters, added later in a different pencil, and my sister. Aloan looked at it a while. Then she put it back at exactly the angle she had found it, and went out, and said nothing about it to anybody, ever. The ford at Belver went high some Februaries and low some Februaries, and the 11 stones stood where they had stood for 400 years. She crossed it on foot when she came down to see her mother, upstream side, out of habit, counting them as she went, which she had done since she was 4. At the 7th, she always stopped and looked down at the gap between it and the 8th, where the water went through dark and quick. She had been carried over a line a man had sworn nobody of her name would cross, by the man who swore it, at walking pace, in a foot of straw, on the anniversary of the day he had begun to be wrong. It had taken 3 years of silence to arrive at, and a torn ligature, and a child who wrote everything down. Grief, she thought, standing on the 7th stone, is mostly a story people tell too early, and then cannot get out of. And love is somebody consenting, in front of 30 people, to look ridiculous. Then she went up the bank and along the lane, and there was smoke going up off the chimneys at the end of the drive, and the wren was cut into the stone over the door, and she wore its double at her shoulder where anybody on the road could see it.